Dear friends, grace, mercy, and peace be with you from the one who is, who was, and who is to come. Amen. I tend to be a glass half empty kind of person. I say that knowing that we need both. Those who see the glass as half full and those who see the glass half empty. Perhaps we are the less enlightened, but yet I think there is a place for us. My mom was on to me, and she used to ask, why is it that people count negative comments or criticisms directed at them as 10 points and count positive comments as only 1 point? Maybe it's only the glass half empty people who do this, or maybe not. But it's true, isn't it? We sometimes stew about the negative and barely notice or even dismiss the positive. I remember Nancy and I attending a school conference for one of our kids in middle school. The teacher started out by telling us everything that was wrong with our child, before saying anything that was right. By the time we got to the positive, we couldn't hear it. On the way out the door, Nancy, who is herself a teacher, like many of you in this room, she told me, that's not how it's done. You always start by saying something positive. And then there is the near addiction that some of us have with bad news. We read the paper. Do people still do that? Read the paper?
Yes.
We could divide the congregation by age with that teaching. So we read the paper, or turn on the news, or check the internet, expecting some awful breaking news, and prepare ourselves for the next shoe to drop. It seems that we are programmed to be outraged, or we are numb all the time. We are in a constant state of alert or a constant state of avoidance. We are taking to the streets, or we are curled up in a ball. When I read these words from Jesus according to Luke, a couple things happen initially. First, I am drawn to the negative, especially the first couple of verses. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth, distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. I give this initial image 10 points, and it takes me a while to get to the promise. Something in me keeps me from hearing the good news that Jesus offers in the midst of these provocative words about the future. Second, the student of the Bible in me reminds myself that the first century Christians for whom this was written were all expecting the end of time that Jesus talks about here in their lifetime to happen within a matter of days or years. And Luke knows this. And Luke plays into this expectation by the way he puts together the narrative. The early Christians took seriously the words of Jesus, who said that the reign of God was at hand. In fact, Luke's Jesus makes reference to the ascension, when they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud, ascending into the heavens with power and great glory, as a coming sign that the end is near. The one who ascends, Jesus, will come again. Like we say in Advent, Maranatha, come Lord. But here they meant it like next week, or in the next few weeks. If we take this reading all by itself, we will get to the good news. It is here. Jesus acknowledges that there will be fainting with fear, but his encouragement is to stand up and raise your heads because your redemption is drawing near. The antidote to fear is to stand up and raise your heads. I don't need to tell you that fear is perhaps the most powerful and destructive emotional driver in our world today. Our fears are personal, and our fears are cosmic, and our fears are everything in between. We are afraid for our children, our nation, and the national world. There are legitimate fears and illegitimate fears. The fear that propels refugees to the U.S. border where they risk having their children tear gassed is a very different kind of fear than most anything that I can imagine. This reading from Luke invites us into the conversation between fear and hope. How do we hold those things in balance? We feel outrage or we feel afraid. And we are confronted with the trap of extreme reactions of complacency or violence, of denial or despair. We willingly wouldn't choose either one of those reactions, but their presence looms. Fear may be a sibling of outrage, or outrage a manifestation of fear. When we experience fear, and I'm not talking about the fight or flight kind of fear, but when we experience existential or cosmic fear, the looming extremes are always close at hand. I can honestly say that when the 4th National Climate Assessment was released by 13 U.S. government agencies last week, my reaction bounced between despair and complacency. How many more scientific studies are needed before we begin to make significant change for the common good or for the preservation of life as we know it? Sometimes it's easier to not raise our heads, but rather to bury our heads in the sand. Of course, the response to fear that Jesus calls us into is hope. Hope makes us extremely vulnerable, so we usually don't go there right away. But hope is not a passive thing. It is not pie in the sky. Hope always involves engagement. Jesus doesn't use the word hope explicitly here, but the phrase "do not be afraid" appears in the Bible 120 times, and never more in the Gospel of Luke. So while Jesus does not use the word hope, he proclaims it, and he calls on his people to receive it as truth. Our challenge, and believe me, this is really hard for the glass half empty crowd among us. Our challenge is not to embrace an uncertain and perilous future with outrage, despair, or complacency, but with hope and engagement. We walk with each other in the midst of grief and uncertainty. We walk with each other in facing the trouble of our world and our daily lives. We organize, rest, pray, sing, love, listen, feast, all as signs of hope. That in the midst of all kinds of trouble, our redemption and the redemption of all of creation is near. I attended a band concert at Luther College. I was down there, my alma mater, for homecoming at the end of October. It was the Sunday after the mass shooting of Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Before the band began to play that Sunday afternoon, the conductor shared these words from the late, great Leonard Bernstein, who would have been 100 years old this year. This will be our reply to violence. To make music more intensely, more beautifully, more devotedly than ever before. There are many ways to make music, literally and figuratively. And it is our practice this Advent and always. Amen.